The interview started with a bang, but it quickly spiraled into chaos. I walked into the room, my heart pounding like a drum in anticipation. The interviewer greeted me with an enthusiasm that felt almost too good to be true. "You're a perfect fit. Welcome aboard," he exclaimed, his voice booming with excitement. For a fleeting moment, I felt like I had won the lottery, a dream job secured without breaking a sweat. But just as quickly as the euphoria hit me, it vanished. His expression shifted. His tone turned colder than ice. "I'm sorry," he said abruptly, "but I can't hire you." My mind reeled. What had just happened? 1 second, I was on top of the world, and the next, I was plummeting into confusion and despair. I tried to ask why, but all I got was vague rambling about some other candidate who supposedly had perfect DRS. What on earth is DRS? Is it a new qualification I've never heard of? Or is it just another way to dismiss me without explanation? The whole situation stank of unfairness, and my frustration began bubbling over. But the worst part wasn't even the rejection. It was how the interviewer toyed with me. He kept changing his mind mid-sentence, leaving me dangling like a puppet on strings. "I think I've made my decision." "Oh, wait, no, not yet." Each word dripped with mockery, as if this entire process were nothing more than entertainment for him. My confidence crumbled under the weight of his insincerity. Was this really how companies hired people? If so, then professionalism was clearly dead. Just as I was trying to process the interviewer's bizarre behavior, the door creaked open, and in walked Catherine. Her entrance felt like a scene from a movie. She glided into the room with an air of confidence that made my stomach churn. The interviewer's eyes lit up instantly, his demeanor shifting from cold indifference to almost reverent admiration. "Oh, Catherine," he exclaimed, his voice dripping with enthusiasm. It was painfully obvious that she had stolen the spotlight, and I could feel my chances slipping away like sand through clenched fingers. The tension in the room thickened as the interviewer leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk rhythmically. "Let me make one thing clear," he said, his tone sharp and calculated. "Only one of you will be chosen. Whoever impresses me the most wins." His words hung in the air like a guillotine blade, ready to drop at any moment. My heart raced as I glanced between him and Catherine, who seemed unfazed by the stakes. Was this some kind of twisted competition? And why did it feel like the rules were being written on the fly? What followed was nothing short of surreal. The interviewer launched into what he called a double interview, but it quickly devolved into a chaotic barrage of absurd questions. First, he turned to Catherine and asked, "Do you know the alphabet?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering, "A, B, C, D, G, G, G." My jaw dropped. How could anyone think that was correct? Yet instead of dismissing her, the interviewer grinned widely and scribbled something on his notepad. "Fascinating," he muttered under his breath. Then came the math question. "What's the square root of 3,721? He demanded, his gaze flicking between us. Catherine confidently replied, 62. For a split second, I thought she'd nailed it, until the interviewer corrected her smugly. "Wrong. It's actually 61. But then, without missing a beat, he added, "But close enough. You're doing great." My head spun. Were we being judged on accuracy or arbitrary whims? To make matters worse, the final question was a logic puzzle designed to unravel even the sharpest minds. "You have 2 apples," he began. leaning forward menacingly. Your grandfather takes one apple from you. How many apples do you have left? Catherine stared at him blankly, while I silently cursed the unfairness of it all. When she finally answered one, the interviewer erupted in applause. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, he cheered, leaving me seething with frustration. By now, the atmosphere was suffocating. Every word, every gesture felt like another layer of psychological torment. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about skills or qualifications anymore. It was about survival. And Catherine, with her calm demeanor and inexplicable charm, seemed miles ahead of me in this strange game. The interview spiraled further into absurdity as the questions became increasingly bizarre, leaving both me and Catherine struggling to keep up. Just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, the male candidate, me, tried to salvage his chances by boasting about his professional background. I worked at the biggest company in the city, I declared with forced confidence, hoping to impress. But then came the twist that made my heart sink. When pressed for specifics, I admitted, almost reluctantly, well, technically I was a stripper. The room fell silent for a split second before the interviewer erupted into laughter. A stripper? Really? That's incredible, he exclaimed, clapping his hands like he'd just witnessed the most groundbreaking revelation of his life. Incredible? Was this man serious? My attempt to highlight my experience had backfired spectacularly, making me look foolish instead of competent. Meanwhile, Catherine sat quietly, her calm demeanor unshaken. Then it was her turn to face the firing squad of nonsensical questions. Do you know the alphabet? The interviewer asked, leaning forward with an exaggerated grin. Without missing a beat, she replied, A, B, C, D, G, G, G. Her answer was so blatantly wrong that I couldn't help but stare at her in disbelief. Yet instead of correcting her, or even acknowledging the mistake, the interviewer scribbled furiously on his notepad and beamed. Amazing! You're truly brilliant, he gushed, his praise dripping with insincerity. My blood boiled. How could such an obvious blunder be rewarded while my professional qualifications were dismissed without a second thought? But the worst was yet to come. The interviewer moved on to what seemed like a harmless math problem. What's the square root of 3,521? Catherine confidently answered 62, only to be told smugly, wrong, it's actually 61. Before I could process this minor victory over her, the interviewer added, but close enough, you're doing fantastic. Fantastic? Was accuracy no longer relevant in this twisted game? Each word felt like a slap in the face, mocking my own efforts to prove myself worthy. The final blow came with the infamous apple riddle. You have 2 apples, the interviewer began, his tone dripping with condescension. Your grandfather takes 1 apple from you. How many apples do you have left? Catherine hesitated briefly before answering, 1. My jaw clenched. 1? That was clearly incorrect. It should have been 0 if logic meant anything here. But instead of pointing out her error, the interviewer erupted in applause. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. You're extraordinary. He cheered, practically jumping out of his seat. I wanted to scream. This wasn't about intelligence or reasoning anymore. It was about favoritism disguised as merit. Every fiber of my being screamed injustice, but there was nothing I could do except watch helplessly as Catherine basked in undeserved praise. By now, the atmosphere was suffocating. The line between reality and madness blurred with every passing moment. I felt like a pawn in some sadistic experiment where rules didn't exist and fairness was a distant memory. The interviewer's erratic behavior only fueled my growing frustration. Why was he bending over backward to accommodate Catherine's mistakes while dismissing my legitimate qualifications? It was infuriating, demoralizing, and utterly bewildering. The moment Catherine was declared the winner, my world imploded. "Catherine," the interviewer announced with theatrical flair, "you are hired." His voice boomed as if he were crowning a queen, and his eyes sparkled with admiration. "You're the most incredible candidate I've ever met." Incredible? My mind reeled at the sheer absurdity of it all. She had answered nearly every question incorrectly. Her alphabet recitation was laughable, her math skills questionable, and her logic non-existent. But somehow she was deemed worthy, while I, with years of experience and qualifications, was tossed aside like yesterday's trash. I couldn't stay silent any longer. My frustration boiled over into outright defiance. "This is discrimination," I shouted, slamming my fist on the desk for emphasis. "You only hire pretty girls, that's all this is about. Looks, not talent or ability." The interviewer smirked, his lips curling into an infuriating grin. Leaning back in his chair, he replied coolly, "Oh no, this isn't about looks. It's all about capability." His tone dripped with sarcasm, each word cutting deeper than the last. How could he sit there so smugly, dismissing my outrage as if it were nothing more than a childish tantrum? But just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the truth came crashing down like a ton of bricks. With a dramatic pause, the interviewer stood up, straightened his tie, and declared, "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the CEO of this company." My jaw dropped. What kind of twisted game was this? He continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Everything you've experienced today was part of a test, a psychological evaluation to see how candidates handle pressure and ambiguity. And let me tell you something. We don't need people who argue or complain. We need individuals who can endure challenges without losing their composure." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Endure challenges? Wasn't I enduring enough by sitting through this circus of nonsense? My blood simmered with anger as I realized the full extent of the manipulation. This wasn't about finding the best candidate. It was about breaking us down, testing our limits, and seeing who would crumble under the weight of absurdity. Catherine's calm demeanor suddenly made sense. She hadn't been playing along because she was brilliant. She'd simply accepted the chaos without resistance. Meanwhile, I had spent the entire time fighting against the tide, protesting what I saw as injustice, only to be labeled as unfit for the role. As the CEO wrapped up his monologue, he added one final twist. "All A players will now be reassessed under new criteria. The rules have changed." Changed? What rules? There were never any rules to begin with. It felt like being trapped in a maze where the walls kept shifting, leaving me disoriented and defeated. By the time he finished speaking, I was too exhausted to protest further. Catherine smiled faintly, already embracing her victory, while I sat there fuming, feeling like a pawn sacrificed in someone else's grand experiment. The moment Catherine was handed her list of tasks, it became painfully clear that this wasn't just a test of skill. It was a test of endurance. The interviewer shoved a pile of papers into her hands with an unsettling grin. "Translate these documents into Bulgarian," he barked, as if expecting her to magically know the language. Then came the avalanche of other impossible demands. Fix the broken coffee machine, which looked like it hadn't worked in years. clean the office that resembled a hurricane zone, and most absurdly, complete his own homework for him. Each task felt like another brick added to an already suffocating wall of chaos. Yet, Catherine didn't flinch. She simply nodded, her calm demeanor unwavering, while I sat there seething with frustration. Meanwhile, I was given one measly assignment: copy a single document. One lousy piece of paper. Was this some kind of cruel joke? While Catherine ran around the room juggling half a dozen ridiculous chores, I was stuck at the desk staring blankly at the photocopier. My mind raced with indignation. Was I being punished for speaking up earlier? For daring to question the unfairness of it all? Every time I glanced over at Catherine, I felt smaller and more insignificant. Here she was, tackling Herculean tasks without complaint, while I was reduced to something barely above a glorified intern. But the real kicker came when none of the equipment cooperated. The coffee machine sputtered and groaned, refusing to turn on no matter how hard Catherine pressed its buttons. The cleaning supplies were either missing or dried up, leaving her scrubbing stains with nothing but a rag and sheer willpower. And the photocopier? It jammed after every single page, forcing me to wrestle with it like some mechanical beast. The office descended into utter mayhem, yet Catherine soldiered on, her determination unshaken. Watching her struggle and somehow succeed only deepened my sense of helplessness. As the hours dragged on, the situation grew increasingly surreal. Machines beeped erratically, papers flew everywhere, and the air buzzed with tension. Catherine's quiet efficiency began to feel less like competence and more like a performance designed to mock me. Why else would she be given such impossible tasks while I was left to rot with menial work? It was as though the entire setup was engineered to break us, to see who would crack under the weight of absurdity. And here I was, sitting idle, unable to do anything but watch her navigate this labyrinth of madness. Just as Catherine finished her final task, untangling the headphones that looked like they'd been gnawed by a rabid squirrel, the interviewer clapped his hands dramatically. "Congratulations, Catherine," he exclaimed, his voice echoing through the chaotic office. "You are officially the winner." His words hung in the air like a gavel striking its final blow. I felt my stomach churn as reality sank in. Despite all my efforts to prove myself, I had lost. Again. The injustice of it all burned hotter than ever. But before I could even process my defeat, the door swung open with a loud creak. In walked a woman whose presence seemed almost otherworldly. She carried herself with an air of effortless perfection, her sharp suit and piercing gaze commanding attention. Without missing a beat, the interviewer leapt to his feet, his eyes wide with admiration. "Ah, you must be Elena," he said, practically bowing. "You're perfect, absolutely flawless. Welcome aboard." My jaw dropped. Perfect? Flawless? What about Catherine, who had just spent hours completing impossible tasks while I sat helplessly watching? And what about me, who had poured my heart into this ordeal only to be dismissed repeatedly? Before I could protest, the interviewer turned to me with a smirk. "I'm sorry," he said coldly, "but your services are no longer required." My blood boiled. "This is ridiculous," I shouted, unable to contain my frustration. "This isn't a hiring process, it's a circus, a meaningless farce." He simply laughed, a low, mocking chuckle that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, but it was meaningful," he replied, his tone dripping with condescension. Every reaction, every outburst, every moment of confusion, it was all part of the experiment. And then came the final twist, the one that shattered whatever remained of my dignity. Leaning back in his chair, the interviewer revealed the truth. None of this was real. It was a social experiment designed to test how people respond to pressure and unfairness. Congratulations. You passed by failing. Passed? Failed? The paradox hit me like a freight train. All along, I thought I was fighting for a job, but instead, I had unknowingly become a subject in some twisted psychological study. As I stumbled out of the room, reeling from the revelation, I heard the interviewer call after me. "Don't worry," he said mockingly. "You'll make a great case study." His laughter followed me out the door, mingling with the sound of chaos still emanating from the office. Catherine stood silently, watching Elena take center stage, while I realized the bitter truth. None of us were truly in control. We were pawns in a game we didn't understand, manipulated by forces beyond our comprehension. The setting of the interview was as surreal as the questions themselves. Instead of a sleek, professional office environment, we were crammed into what could only be described as a street club. The air buzzed with loud, jarring music that made it nearly impossible to concentrate. Machines around the room, whether printers, coffee makers, or computers, were either broken or unplugged, adding to the sense of dysfunction. It wasn't just chaotic, it was absurd. Every time I glanced at the flickering fluorescent lights or heard the bass-heavy beats pounding in the background, I felt more disconnected from reality. This wasn't an interview. It was a performance, and none of us were given a script. As the day dragged on, the truth began to dawn on me. Nothing here was real. The machines didn't work because they weren't meant to. The documents Catherine and I were tasked with handling turned out to be meaningless scraps of paper filled with gibberish. Even the people seemed like actors, their actions choreographed for some unseen audience. When I confronted the interviewer about this, his response was chillingly casual. "Oh, come on," he said with a shrug. "It's all in her head." His dismissive tone sent shivers down my spine. Was he referring to Catherine? To me? Or was this entire charade designed to drive us mad? By the time the final verdict was delivered, I realized how much time and energy I had wasted on this nonsensical ordeal. Hours spent trying to prove myself in a place where logic didn't exist, where effort was mocked and fairness was a foreign concept. It hit me like a ton of bricks. This organization wasn't just flawed, it was utterly meaningless. Yet despite my growing realization, there was no escape. The door had long since closed behind me, both literally and metaphorically. I was trapped in this bizarre experiment until its bitter end. When the interviewer leaned back in his chair and declared, "This is my building, my rules," it became clear that this wasn't just about hiring someone. It was about control. He wielded power not because he deserved it, but because he could. And now, standing amidst the chaos of malfunctioning equipment and hollow tasks, I understood the cruel irony. I had poured everything into pleasing someone who thrived on others' failure. It was too late to leave. I'd already invested too much. But knowing that didn't dull the sting of betrayal. Some people leave scars, others leave lessons. Burn and reborn stories that break you, then rebuild you.